Hello, everyone. Um, the episode I'm going to do today is on a band that I love and are still touring today. They got back together maybe 10, 15 years ago and have released a couple of albums since they got back together. Um, this is a band some of you might know from Creation Records called The House of Love. Um, though they never achieved very much success during their period, they were very well regarded by critics and such. So some of you may know of them, especially if you're a Creation Records fan. But um, their story starts in the mid to late '80s, when bands such as the Jesus and Mary Chain, which I've done an episode on here before, came to Creation and kind of were known for having a different sound, a sort of wall of feedback and noise kind of thing, which them and a couple of other bands, including the House of Love, were later considered influential on the shoegaze movement back in the late 80s, early 90s. Those of you who are familiar with that. Their only album released on Creation was the self-titled House of Love. Well, let's say this is the first House of Love. There's like three different albums under that title, so it does get a bit confusing. This is I forget the different terms that people use for them, but this is the Creation album. This record has probably one of their more well-known singles, Christine, and is a great album. Has Christine, Road, Man to Child, Love in a Car, Happy. It's a amazing, very solid record with a lot of great songs on it. This version is fascinating. This is Cherry Red Records reissue, which has this is a 3-disc set. They just recently came out with a 5-disc set, which I believe included a bunch of live shows on it or something. But this has the second album, so-called, more like a singles collection that Creation came out with in 88, 89, about the same time period. Before the album came out, they had released a couple of singles, including Shine On, which is probably another one that very well-known single of theirs, and Destroy the Heart, which was famously voted John Peel's single of the year in 1989. At this lineup of the band, it was Guy Chadwick, who was the singer-songwriter of the band, Terry Bickers, who left after they left Creation. He had some sort of falling out with the guys. I don't know the story that well. And then the bass player and the drummer. As I said, they did this record, got a lot of acclaim, got on a lot of TV shows, sort of best of the year, best new artist type things, and then decided to go to a major label. Their major label debut, also called The House of Love, this was generally called the Butterfly album, is their first record after. I believe their guitarist Terry Bickers plays on this record, I believe, but he is not credited and was not featured as a member of the band. He wasn't in any of the promotional. You can find promotional videos of him playing some of the songs on this record, so I have a feeling it was during the process of making the record they had some sort of falling out. But this is just as solid of an album. It has Hannah, the amazing opening track, better sounding version of Shine On, Beatles and the Stones, I Don't Know Why I Love You, it's probably their most well-known single, Never, Room, Blind. It's chock full of great songs. One of the problems with the House of Love, in terms of their success, was timing. While the first album came out in 1988, it kind of missed the sort of scene that was attached with indie, was still hadn't quite broken in a lot of fields until a year or two later. Um, and then this record came out, and the transition into a major label was sort of still a relatively new thing in the alternative world. So they sort of were a little early on that front, and by that point had become a different scene in England, and so they kind of didn't fit anymore with what was happening at the time. That same year, 1990, they released a sort of outtakes and rarities type thing of, like, I think unused songs that they had recorded during the previous two albums. It's called "The Spy in the House of Love," which is a famous book, which is actually featured on the cover. It's rare to have one of these sort of records that actually has songs that they would play live and would do constantly. There's a version of them doing Marble, the first song on this, on The Word, which was a popular TV show over in England at the time. But Marble, Safe, Phone, a couple of others on here that they would play in shows, and still there's good footage of them doing some of the songs in this, and it's pretty solid for an outtakes and rarities record. It's pretty solid. It has a lot of good songs on it. The next record was Babe Rainbow, which they attempted to kind of follow the trend a little bit and incorporate some of the dance music thing that was happening in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, like the Stone Roses and all of that sort of stuff that was happening, house music. Unfortunately, that scene had come to a screeching halt by 1982 because of grunge. So by the time this record came out, it was already outdated, which is unfortunate because it has some very good songs on this record. Crush Me, The Girl with the Loneliest Eyes, Fade Away, I think, Feel, so it's a little of its time period. It has a little bit of the dance floor house music scene to it, but still has their solid songs, and mainly, I said, it's mainly just the production is a little dated of the time period. About this time, they were starting to splinter because partially because of the firing of the guitarist Terry. Guy got a little full of himself, and they started having infighting with the band. And so by the time they got to Audience with the Mind, not too long after this record, they broke up. It's not a great album. This is 92, 93. But it does have some very interesting, it has some good stuff on it. It's not nearly as solid as their previous albums, but it's still worth a listen, I think, if you're a fan. And it has stands up with the rest of their catalog in most of the stuff on here. As I said, they then broke up in the mid-90s, partially because of drug use and infighting and all that sort of stuff that normally happens in those sort of situations. Years later, the band got back together. They have released a record, I think it's called Days Gone By, which I cannot find very much. I saw it once and didn't grab it when I saw it, so I don't have a copy of that record. I've heard a couple of songs on it. It sounded like it was pretty much the old band. They sounded very much in the same vein. It, sounded pretty good from what I heard. A couple of years back, wow, it's already 7 years old, they released this album, which is She Paints Words in Red, which is a pretty solid record. Has some great songs on it. And it was the band. It was the four of them, the four members of the band, including the guitarist. The single off this was Baby Got Back on Its Feet, which you can see a music video for online. And they've done a couple of reissues of live recordings and stuff like that over the years. But just very solid, very good pop songs. They do have very dark lyrics to their songs. I will say some of their songs are you look at the lyrics of them and it's kind of It's kind of skeezy or kind of depressing in places like Hannah is about I believe certain abuse, and you know other songs are sort of may seem kind of chipper and but are tend to be kind of dark subject matter. But regardless, they're a fascinating band and did a lot of very good pop music. Um, Very interesting sonic soundscapes that was sort of rare for the time period and has kind of very rarely been repeated better since. So I think they're very much a band to look up, The House of Love. So thank you all, and I will see you all sometime next week.